Hi everybody, Miss Levy here. So today's going to be a quick one. It's another home woodshop challenge. And I'm going to show you how you can make a square at home. And I'm not talking about the shape of the square. I'm talking about a tool that we can use to make sure that something has a 90-degree angle. Okay, so you might be like, what is a 90-degree angle? And why does it matter? And why do we need a tool for this purpose? There are lots of different kinds of squares. Most of them do deal with 90-degree angles because that's the most frequently used by carpenters and woodworkers. But it depends on what you make. Maybe you're a carpenter that makes a lot of things with bevels or miters, right? Those are different versions of cutting things at angles. Or maybe you're someone that makes art out of wood or other materials that needs to use a square to get a 45-degree angle because that's how your pieces fit together. But most frequently people are looking for 90 degrees, especially when we're building. So 90-degree angle is this, right? This is a piece of cardboard I cut off of a box. And a lot of times a 90-degree angle is drawn like that, right? And this kind of L shape shows us that this is square or 90 degrees. Okay? So that means, right, if this corner is 90 degrees, this corner is also 90 degrees, right? And those add up to 180. Okay. And then we have, right, we could do it across. We would have a total of 360 if you're into math. I'm not going to get too into the math side of angles today. This lesson is going to be designed for folks who are anywhere from 4 and up. So we're just going to do the really basic stuff to keep it on par with everyone. So I have a bunch of pieces of cardboard, which is kind of like our replacement wood. You can make squares for yourself out of wood in your shop. That's a really fun project. And you can even get some metal involved because metal tends to move a little bit less. It shrinks and swells less than wood. So if you're making a tool for measuring, you don't want it to move very much so that you can kind of refer to it over and over again and know that it will be the same, right? That's the point of our measuring tools. So I have Sharpie. I have an X-acto knife. You can also use a utility knife. You can use scissors. Scissors are a great tool, especially if you're younger. And then I have some rulers that came off of a drawing machine that I have. I actually don't have just regular wooden rulers at home, but you could use wooden rulers that you have around or a wood and a metal ruler. You cannot just use a tape measure for this. You need something that is rigid. So if cardboard is all you have, or even like cereal boxes would do, that is a great place to start. Okay, so we can see we have cardboard, we have rulers. I used a X-acto knife to cut these. One key thing is that, so when I cut these, which will be my first square that I'll show you, I made sure that both sides were square. So you don't need a cutting mat to do this. You can even just kind of stick you can measure across your piece. So you can start anywhere on a ruler. I tend not to start at 0. That's a really good tip, and my students will know that because you can see on this ruler that 0 isn't at the end, which is good. That's a more precise ruler. But on most rulers, 0 is at the end. So if the end gets banged up, then where we start, right, we think it's at the end, but we lost maybe a 1/16 of an inch, right? So where we start, we lost some. And then our measurements end up being that much that there was like a dent or that the ruler just wore down over time, that much off. So I usually start at 1. So if I measure from 1 to the other side's 4, that's 3 inches, right? And then I can even just try to maintain this edge at 1 and watch what happens to the other side. And I'm noticing this isn't very even. So take a measurement up here. It's a little more than 3 inches here. It's even more than 3 inches there. And there, it's right about at 3 inches. Looks like it's less, right? Weird. But I can tell it's not totally square, and I can also tell if I do have a cutting mat. Like if your parent sews or likes to do paper crafts, they might have one of these. So I can just look at that and tell that here the squares aren't full, right? And down here, the square is almost full. It's not getting cut off by the side. So you want to make sure that you have a piece of cardboard that is nice and square to start. And remember, I don't mean square like this. I mean square like all of the corners are 90-degree angles. Okay. So the way you can do that, right, is you can measure across. If it's not square, let's take my not square one. Measure across. I'm not even lining it up with the cutting mat anymore. I'm gonna take a pencil. Preferably the pencil will be nice and sharp so that my marks don't take up space. And then I'm gonna mark where it's 3 inches. Mark at 3 inches. And mark at 3 inches up here. And then I'm gonna connect all my marks. And then I'm gonna shave off just that little bit of cardboard, right? So I can do that keeping my fingers out of the way with my X-acto knife. To be even more exact, and if you're not used to using an X-acto knife, I could hold up my ruler and use that as a guide for the blade, okay? So that's making a piece of square cardboard to start. Then I suggest cutting that in half. So you have this, the halves don't have to be exactly the same size. So I'm pressing down my ruler. And I'm making sure nothing moves while I'm cutting. Great. So right then I have 2 sides. And I'm just gonna use these ones that I started with because they're a little more clear. So let's actually make this side all weird so that we can tell. This is a side that wasn't square because at first these were together like this, right? And then I squared up these edges, right? And then I eyeballed this. I didn't even use a ruler. So let's do that on this side too, to just make it extra clear because it's easy to get confused. So these 2 sides are not square. These are, okay? So the square tool consists of 2 parts overlapping or, joined together usually. And there's, again, I said there's a lot of different kinds, but we're just going to be making one that's based off of a machinist square. And it's not going, or they're also called engineer squares. They're really simple. They're L-shaped. And it's not going to be anything fancy. It's not going to be as exact as your machinist square that you would buy at the store. Okay, so I folded over one edge. I'm sure you can probably think of more creative ways to do that than I can. What if I even do this, right? And I'm gonna fold over this edge, kind of overlap them. So one over like this, one over like that. Okay, and then my curvy edges are on the outside. That's really important. So we want this part on the inside edges of the L shape to be the really straight part, okay? So you can tape this, you can glue this, but before we do that, I'm just gonna use some gaffer's tape. It's really sticky. Before we do that, we're gonna take this to something that is square in our house to make sure that we have it accurately set up. Okay, so I have my square here with the curvy edges, or not straight edges on the outside, right? And I'm holding it together. And I'm using a corner in my house. This is assuming that the carpenters that built this house did a good job making everything 90 degrees, right? See how at first it had this gap right here, right? And now I'm pushing it so that there's no space, not even a hairline crack of space between the cardboard and the wall. Okay, so now I can take my tape and I can, while holding it up against the wall, which I can't show right now because I don't have two hands, I'm holding the phone with one hand, but while I'm holding it up against the wall, I'm gonna tape it so that it's touching the wall perfectly. So there's not even a bit of light. If you looked at it from underneath, wouldn't even be a bit of a light shining through. So not like this, right? I want them evenly pressed up against the wall, okay? And then we will have a basic square. Okay, so I taped it, and you can see it's working pretty well so far. I wanna make sure that I tape it in a way where it's really strong and it can't move, because we're gonna go around our houses and we're gonna see if we can find other things that are square. So I used a corner here, right? I could go to this other corner. See, is this square? Huh, no, it doesn't look square because see, it has this space. If you are older and you want to get fancy and you have a protractor at home, you can even measure the angle, right? You can see, oh, that's 3 degrees off of square, right? You can do some math around that too. We can measure, like I even have little paintings here, right? Canvases that I could measure to see if they're square. And now I'm noticing, oh, my square looks like it's the same amount off here as it was against the wall. So maybe my square got off. So I'm gonna go back to the first place where I made my square. Yeah, so it's off. So this is an example of why you need to tape or glue it together really tight so it doesn't change as you move around, right? Okay, so this is just a basic square. Pretty cool. And we can add numbers to this too, which I'll show you in a sec. Okay, so I've made a few squares here, and you can see that I have one that I could make with rulers if I wanted to, and that would be really easy to line the numbers up, right? Where then I might not even have to use the wall to make it square. I can just line my numbers up and then go check at the wall before I tape it together or glue it together. I'm not gonna glue my plastic rulers together though. But here's one that I made, and you can make them different shapes too, right? As long as they have this 90-degree shape here. And so I can even check it on my cutting mat, which is pretty handy. And I can say, I don't like that that's moving all that much. I'm gonna move my piece of cedar out of the way here. Yesterday we did our tree identification video, so I've got some tree ID treasures still in the house. Okay, so I taped this one together in a different way. I wonder what ways you can try to attach your pieces. And then this is where my cutting mat comes in handy, but you can also use a ruler. Right? I could just use this ruler and line it up with the edge and do this that way. But my cutting mat has 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch squares, so I can just mark as I go along. Then I could even make my own 4, 5 measurements, right? And I can get into it. I can do a longer line where 1 inch is, shorter line where 1/2 inch is. You get really into it. I could even do it on this side, right? And then I can use my ruler to do 1/4 inches. Maybe I'll just mark those with little dots, right? And I could even do 1/8 inch. I would recommend, if you're older and you want to get down to the more precise measurements, I would really recommend using a pencil, a really sharp pencil, or a thin Sharpie for doing this, because as they're getting smaller, right, it's going to be harder for me to tell where the actual line of that measurement, or the marking for that measurement is, if it's a thick Sharpie line. And then I can go up on my other side. Cool. And you can see my drawings from earlier getting in the way, but that's okay. This is really just an experiment. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Cool. And then maybe I don't like this part. I wonder what shape you can make your square. If you want, you could even make a hip square. Or maybe I'll do a video on that later. You can make a hip square, which is a square that would fit inside this space. So it would be like a triangle shape, right? And that's really good for helping us measure 45-degree angles, all different kinds of angles. And we can also put it into spaces. Instead of just having a corner that we put this on the outside of, we can put it into spaces a little more easily. But actually, let me show you that now too. So you can use your square to measure convex things and concave things, or things that poke out and things that have kind of a hole, if that makes sense. Okay. So now that I have my square with dimensions on it, I could even do dimensions on the outside too, right? And this could be big, it could be small, it could be any size. I encourage you to make different sizes. That would be really fun, especially with younger ages. So I showed you how to measure the angle of something on the outside, which I actually can't do here. You can see that that doesn't quite fit. And I don't want to jam it in because this is a precise tool of measurement, right? So I'm not gonna jam it in there. So what I could do is I could hold it up like this at an angle. Let me show you over here. So the square doesn't have to be flat when you're using it, right? You can use it up like this. You want it to touch as much of what you're measuring as possible. You don't want it to be just touching air. And then you can also measure, like I see this part of my window that doesn't quite look like it's straight. So I'm gonna use my square to find out. So I'm gonna push it on the part that I think looks straight. Then I'm gonna see, whoa, it is way off. Right, you can see that there's a big triangle shape of airspace in there, which means it's not 90 degrees. What else can I measure? I could measure to see if my window is square. That's against the glass pane right now. So how many objects can you find in your house that are perfectly 90 degrees? How good does it feel when your square fits perfectly onto an object? Let's see if I can give you an example here. Right, so like here's my square. Oh, it doesn't fit perfectly. You can see that it has a little space at the bottom, right? If your square isn't fitting perfectly onto any object that you're testing it out on, is that because your square actually isn't 90 degrees? Or is it because your objects are not 90 degrees? So try it out on more objects is my suggestion. And then you can also measure. You can go back to the kind of drawing board and remake another square and see if they line up, like I suggested earlier. And there's some other tricks about how to measure kind of across these spaces, but I'm not going to get into those today. But those are ways that you can check your square. Can you make squares of different shapes? Can you add numbers to the inside and the outside? And can you maybe even try to see if there are any square things outside? And I'm really excited to see the results.